There is a mat in this story. Not a bed, not a mattress, not even a foam pad on the floor with a sheet over it. A mat. A thin, woven sleeping mat with a tier running diagonally across its middle. The kind of tier that means the mat has been used for years by someone who had something better waiting to replace it. The kind of tier that makes sleeping on it uncomfortable. The kind of tier that, if you left it outside in the rain and brought it back in damp and cold, would make sleeping on it something close to miserable. That mat was given to a widow. Not found, not stumbled upon, not offered apologetically with a promise to find something better tomorrow. Given, deliberately, placed on the floor of a cold back room with one small window and told, without words, because the cruelest instructions are the ones delivered without words, that this was her place now. This was what she deserved. This was what she would sleep on in the house that had once been warm and welcoming and full of her son's laughter. The widow's name was Mama Ekin. She was 68 years old. She had buried her husband 17 years earlier. She had raised 3 children on a teacher's salary and a vegetable garden, and the particular stubborn grace of a woman who had decided, a long time ago, that difficulty was not a reason to stop. She had attended every school play and every prize giving and every church harvest and every naming ceremony in her community for 40 years. She had cooked for funerals and christenings and village meetings and anyone who was hungry. She had been, for her entire adult life, the kind of woman that a community builds around without knowing it, the steady one, the warm one, the one whose presence made everything feel more manageable. And now she was sleeping on a torn mat, in the back room of her son's house, while her daughter-in-law slept in the master bedroom with the good mattress and the ceiling fan and the en-suite bathroom, and everything else that the house contained, while her daughter-in-law's mother occupied the second bedroom, while her daughter-in-law's younger sister occupied the third bedroom, while Mama Ekin, who had given her son to this woman in marriage, who had prayed over this union with everything she had, who had stood at the front of the church in her best lace and wept with joy when they exchanged rings. Mama Ekin slept on a torn mat in a room that used to be the storage room and still smelled faintly of paint and old newspapers. But there is something else in this story, something that Mrs. Chitty Bankle, because that was the daughter-in-law's name and we will call her by it, something that Mrs. Chitty Bankle did not know. She did not know about the envelope. She did not know about the lawyer in Abuja. She did not know that 3 months before the torn mat was given to Mama Ekin, a document had been signed in a quiet office on Maitama Drive in Abuja, witnessed by 2 solicitors and a notary, and that this document contained certain provisions about a certain property and a certain amount of money and a certain elderly woman's rights, provisions that were now sitting patiently in a file in a drawer, waiting. Just waiting. Because the person who had arranged those provisions was someone Chitty thought she understood completely. She did not understand him at all. His name was Chitty. He was 34 years old. He was handsome in the way that quiet, serious men are handsome, not immediately, not loudly, but in the way that grows on you the longer you look. He had built a real estate and construction company from nothing, from the absolute nothing of a boy who grew up in a 2-room house in Onitsha and who had understood at the age of 11 that the world was arranged by people who owned things, and that the only way to matter in such a world was to own something first. He was Mama Ekin's youngest son. He lived in Abuja. He had called his mother every week without fail for 6 years. And for the past 3 months, something in his mother's voice had been different. He could not name it. She never said anything alarming. She always said she was fine. She always said his brother Emeka was treating her well, that his wife Chitty was a good woman, that the house was comfortable. But something in her voice. Mothers are taught, in the particular school of suffering that is African motherhood, to say they are fine when they are not, to smile through phone calls, to not burden, to not worry, to not be the reason a child carries extra weight. It is a curriculum so thorough and so long that the graduates of it can deliver an entirely convincing performance of wellness while sitting on a torn mat in a back room that smells of old newspapers. Chitty had attended enough of his mother's performances to know when she was performing. He made some calls, he spoke to a neighbor he trusted, he heard what he needed to hear. And then, quietly, methodically, in the way that the most significant things are done, he made his arrangements. The lawyer came on a Tuesday morning. Chitty was not expecting a lawyer on a Tuesday morning. She was not expecting anyone. She was in the sitting room watching a morning program, her mother in the kitchen making tea, her sister upstairs still in bed at 10 o'clock. Emeka was at work. Everything was, in her calculation, under control. The knock at the gate was firm, 3 knocks unhurried. What came through that gate was not just a lawyer. What came through that gate was the full weight of 6 years of a son watching, and a mother enduring, and a document signed in Abuja, and a mat with a tear running diagonally across its middle. What came through that gate was consequence. And Chitty, who had spent 3 months perfecting her control of that house, was about to discover that she had never, not for one single day, been in control of anything that actually mattered. Stay right here. If you believe that God keeps receipts, that patience has a payday, that a widow's prayer is the most dangerous weapon in the world, then you need to hear this story. This is the story of Mama Ekin, and the Tuesday morning that changed everything. Like this video right now if you believe no one who wrongs a widow goes unpunished. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub and hit that notification bell. We are just getting started. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed someone mistreat an elderly person? Tell us what happened. We are reading every single comment. Her name, before she was anyone's mother, before she was anyone's wife, before she was anything other than herself, was Ngozi Adiz Okafor. She was born in 1955 in Nnakwa, a small town in what is today Idemili South local government area of Anambra State, a place of red earth roads and large compound houses, and the particular social architecture of Igbo community life, where everyone was everyone's business in the best possible sense, and where a child could be raised effectively by an entire street if necessary. Her father, Chief Tobechukwu Okafor, was a man of some standing. He had been a teacher, then a headmaster, then a local government official, and at each stage he had carried himself with the kind of dignity that does not require announcement. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. When Tobechukwu Okafor entered a room, the room organized itself around him. Not out of fear. He was not a man who inspired fear, but out of respect for someone who had consistently, over many years, done the right thing. He was the kind of man who other men went to when they had arguments they couldn't resolve themselves. Her mother, Lolo Chidinma, was the counterpoint. Where Tobechukwu was still, Chidinma was motion. She was everywhere at once, in the kitchen before dawn, in the market by morning, in 3 neighbors' houses by afternoon, at church in the evening. She cooked without recipes and fed without counting and laughed without measuring it. She had a laugh that, according to family legend, could be heard from the water pump at the far end of the street. Ngozi was the second of 4 children. She grew up in a house that was not wealthy but was full of food, full of people, full of the constant warm noise of a family that liked each other. She did well in school, not brilliantly, not in the way that gets you featured in the local newspaper, but steadily, consistently, with the particular kind of academic dependability that teachers love because it requires no special attention. She was the student who always had her homework done, who could be asked to read aloud without notice, who stayed after class occasionally not because she was in trouble but because she was curious. She trained as a teacher. It was the natural trajectory of someone like her, someone who had grown up in a home where education was treated as the closest thing to sacred, where books were kept on a shelf that was dusted separately from everything else, where her father sometimes read to them from the newspaper at dinner not because there was important news, but because the habit of engaging with the world in written form was a value he wanted to transmit. She taught primary school for the first 3 years of her career, then moved to junior secondary. She taught English language and social studies. She was, by all accounts, a very good teacher, demanding in the way that good teachers are demanding, which is to say she demanded the best from her students not because she wanted to see them struggle, but because she genuinely believed they could give it, and she wanted to be the one to call that out of them. She met Leonard Chukwuma Ekine in 1978. He was 26. She was 23. He was a civil engineer who had just returned from a year working on a road construction project in Kano, and who had come back to Nnakwa to attend his cousin's wedding with the particular energy of a man who has been away long enough to appreciate home again. They were introduced at the wedding reception by Leonard's cousin Amaka, who had told Ngozi beforehand that there was someone she absolutely had to meet, and had told Leonard simultaneously that there was someone he absolutely had to meet, which was the kind of matchmaking that only worked when the matchmaker was correct about both parties. She was correct about both parties. Leonard was not immediately impressive. He was not tall, he was not flashy, he did not have the surface confidence of a man performing for an audience. What he had was something that Ngozi noticed in the first 20 minutes of conversation. He listened. He actually listened, not in the performative way of a man trying to impress, but in the genuine way of someone who was interested. He asked questions that followed from what she had just said rather than questions that pivoted to himself. He remembered details she had mentioned early in the conversation and referenced them later. She told her mother about him that night. Her mother said, "Tell me more." Ngozi said, "He listens." Her mother said, "Marry him immediately." She did not marry him immediately. She married him 2 years later in 1980, after a courtship of letters, actual written letters, because the telephone situation in Nnakwa was complicated, and occasional visits, and one memorable argument over something neither of them could later remember, which they resolved by Leonard driving 240 kilometers to Nnakwa unannounced to apologize in person, which Ngozi considered one of the most romantic things anyone had ever done, and which she told their children about regularly for the rest of their lives. They married in December 1980. She wore white lace. He wore a gray suit that was very slightly too large because his mother had insisted on buying it 3 weeks before the wedding at a time when Leonard was still eating in ways that construction project schedules did not always permit. The church was full. The reception was in the family compound. The food was made by Lolo Chidinma and 6 other women and was, by universal agreement, extraordinary. They built a life together in Onitsha, where Leonard's engineering work was centered. A life that was modest in material terms but rich in what mattered. Leonard worked on roads and bridges and government infrastructure projects. Ngozi taught. They lived in a rented flat that grew into a rented house that grew into, eventually, after years of saving with the particular intensity of 2 people who have agreed on a destination and are walking toward it together, a house that they owned. Not large. Not showy, but theirs, solid, real. They had 3 children. The first was Emeka, born in 1982. A big, energetic boy who arrived in the world already seeming to know what he wanted from it, which at various stages included everything from being a footballer to a politician to, eventually, a businessman. He ran a building supplies company in Onitsha that was doing reasonably well. Emeka was the easy child in some ways. Self-directed, loud, sociable, the kind of child who makes friends easily and fills rooms easily, and who you never had to worry about in terms of loneliness or confidence. The second was Adiz, born in 1985. She had her grandmother Chidinma's energy and her grandfather Tobchukwu's stillness simultaneously, which was a combination that expressed itself as a particular kind of quiet determination. She became a pharmacist. She lived in Port Harcourt with her husband and 3 children. She called her mother every Sunday without fail, and had a voice that could carry warmth down a telephone line the way very few voices could. The third was Chitty. Chijubum Ekin. Born in 1990, the year things were beginning to change everywhere in Nigeria, and the year Leonard Ekin had his biggest engineering contract, a bridge project in Rivers State that had taken 3 years of bidding and relationship building, and which, when it finally came through, gave the family a financial stability they had not had before. Chitty arrived into relative comfort compared to his older siblings. Not wealth, Leonard and Ngozi had always lived carefully, saved deliberately, but comfort. He had his own room. He had shoes that were bought in his size. He had textbooks that were new rather than inherited. He was aware of the difference between his situation and those of many of his classmates, and this awareness, rather than producing the casual entitlement it sometimes produces in comfortable children, produced something more useful. A particular attentiveness to how things worked, how value was created, why some people had things and others didn't. He was 8 when he first understood what property meant. Not property as a concept. He had encountered that in school, property as a fact of life, as a thing that determined almost everything about how people lived. He had been walking with his father through a neighborhood in Onitsha on a Sunday, the kind of purposeless Sunday afternoon walk that Leonard sometimes proposed as a way of getting out of the house and seeing the city. They had walked past a row of new houses being built, simple houses, nothing dramatic, but solid concrete block construction with proper foundations and good roofing sheets. "Who owns those?" Chitty had asked. "A man named Okafor," Leonard said. "He bought that land 15 years ago when it was just bush." "How much did he pay?" Leonard told him. "And now?" Leonard told him what the completed houses would sell for. Chitty was quiet for a moment, doing the arithmetic. "So he made his money by holding land and building on it," the 8-year-old said. Leonard looked at his youngest son. "Yes," he said, "essentially." "That's what I want to do," Chitty said. Leonard laughed. Then he stopped laughing, because the expression on his son's face was not the expression of a child making a casual declaration. It was the expression of a child who had just discovered a direction and was already orienting himself toward it. "Then you need to study very hard," Leonard said. "You need to understand finance. You need to understand law. You need to understand construction. And you need to be patient because land does not pay you immediately. It pays you when you are ready to receive the payment." "How long?" "Years, sometimes decades." Chitty nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. Leonard told Ngozi about the conversation that evening. She listened and then said, "He'll do it." Leonard said, "You think so?" Ngozi said, "He's exactly like you. When you decide a thing, you do the thing he decided." Leonard died in 2007, of complications following surgery for a condition that had been building quietly for 2 years, and that, by the time it was diagnosed properly, had progressed further than anyone had hoped. He died in a hospital in Enugu with Ngozi holding his hand and Emeka and Adiz on either side of the bed and Chitty, 17 years old, his father's serious eyes in his young face, standing at the foot of the bed, not crying yet, watching his father's face with the concentrated attention of someone memorizing something they know they will not see again. Leonard's last coherent conversation was with Chitty alone, on the afternoon of the day before he died, when the others had stepped out for food and the ward was quiet. "The house," Leonard said. His voice was weak but his eyes were clear. "I know, Papa," Chitty said. "Your mother, don't let anyone." "I know, Papa, I will not let anyone." Leonard looked at his son for a long moment. Then he said, "You will be big, Chitty. I have always known it." Chitty held his father's hand. He did not speak. He did not need to. Leonard died the following morning at 6:15, as the birds were beginning outside the hospital window. He was 55 years old. After the burial, which was done properly, with all the ceremonies that Igbo tradition and Leonard's standing in his community required, a week of mourning and feasting and remembrance that left the family exhausted and empty in equal measure, Chitty went back to school. He was in his second year of senior secondary school. He had an exam to prepare for. His father had told him the house needed taking care of, and he had said he knew, and that was a promise he intended to keep. And the best way he knew to keep it was to do exactly what his father had always said. Study hard, understand finance, understand law, understand construction, be patient. He did all of these things. He sat his WAEC examinations and scored distinctions in 7 subjects. He gained admission to the University of Lagos on his first attempt, which in 2009 was not a given for any student regardless of results. He studied estate management, a deliberate choice, not an accidental one. His father had pointed him at land and buildings and value, and he was walking in that direction. At UNILAG, Chitty Ekin was not a flashy student. He was not the one at the parties, not the one with the largest social circle, not the most immediately visible person in any room. What he was, and what his lecturers noticed early, was a worker. He read everything, not just the course materials, everything adjacent to them. He read real estate investment analysis papers from American and British business schools that he downloaded from journal databases on the university's internet. He read Nigerian property law with the kind of attention that law students bring to their books. He attended every guest lecture that the faculty arranged, arrived early, sat in the front row, asked the questions that made the lecturers pause and think before answering. He also worked. In his second year, he started a small service, essentially, a property listing coordination for landlords in the Yaba and Surular areas who needed help finding tenants. He charged a small fee, both to landlords for listing their properties and to tenants for access to the list. It was not dramatic. It generated perhaps 15 to 20,000 naira a month, which in 2011 was enough to cover his personal expenses and put a small amount aside. In his third year, he expanded. He began offering a broader property management service, handling viewings, conducting basic due diligence on prospective tenants, managing rent collection for landlords who found the process cumbersome. By his final year, he had 8 landlords as clients and a small but real income. He graduated with a second-class upper degree in 2013. His mother attended the graduation ceremony and sat in the third row and clapped so long and so hard that the woman beside her asked if she was all right. She said she was perfect. The month after graduation, Chitty borrowed 150,000 naira from his sister Adiz, not a gift, a loan with a repayment schedule that he wrote out on paper and made her sign and registered a business. He called it Ekin Prop Solutions. He moved into a single room in Yaba, began working 18 hours a day, and started building. The first 2 years were hard, not disastrous. He had clients from his university days, a small reputation, the confidence of a person who knew exactly what he was doing but lean. He ate simply. He had one set of business clothes that he rotated. His furniture was functional and nothing else. He put everything back into the business. Year 3 was when things shifted. He had been working with a developer named Chief Azinj, a wary man in his 50s who had started in oil and gas equipment supply and was diversifying into property development. Chief Azinj had hired Ekin Prop Solutions to manage the tenancy side of a small residential development he was completing in Gbagada. Chitty had done the job thoroughly and had also, without being asked, produced a detailed analysis of pricing in the Gbagada market that suggested the units were being offered at below optimal prices, and that a specific marketing approach to Lagos's growing young professional class could increase occupancy rates significantly. Chief Azinj had read the analysis twice. Then he had called Chitty into his office. "How old are you?" he asked. 25, Chitty said. This analysis, Chief Asinj said, tapping the document. You did this yourself. Yes, sir. This is good work. This is really good work. He paused. I want to give you a bigger project. The bigger project was a 30-unit residential development in Magodo, Lagos. Chief Asinj's biggest development yet, and the one that needed the most careful market positioning. Chitty managed the whole go-to-market, pricing strategy, target tenant profile, marketing materials, viewings, negotiations, lease agreements. All 30 units were occupied within 4 months of completion. Chief Asinj gave him a bonus that was twice his management fee. And then he did something more valuable than the money. He introduced Chitty to 3 other developers. Those introductions were the doors that opened the others. By 2018, 5 years after graduation, Chitty was 28. Ekin Prop Solutions had grown from a one-man operation in a Yaba room to a proper company with 9 employees, an office in Victoria Island, and contracts covering property management and development, consulting for 11 different developers across Lagos and Abuja. The company's annual revenue was in the hundreds of millions of naira. Chitty himself was, by any reasonable definition, wealthy, not at the level of the old Lagos money, not yet at the level of the names in business newspapers, but genuinely, substantially wealthy. He moved his operations center of gravity to Abuja in 2019. This was strategic. The Abuja property market was developing rapidly, federal government presence created particular opportunities, and several of his best development partners were Abuja-based. He set up an Abuja office, moved there himself, took a proper apartment in Maitama, and began building the Abuja side with the same methodical intensity that had built the Lagos side. He called his mother every Sunday, without fail. He visited Onitsha, where his mother still lived in the house he had grown up in, now owned outright, debt-free, every few months. He came with food and medications and things she had mentioned needing, and he sat in the kitchen with her and ate her cooking, and told her about what was happening with the business, and listened to her tell him about the neighborhood and the church and what Emeka was doing and how Adi's children were growing. He had, through all of this, remained single. Not from lack of interest. He was by his late 20s a man that women noticed and found compelling, but from a combination of focus and a particular standard he had developed, which was essentially this. He was looking for someone who was real. He had no interest in performing wealth for a partner, no interest in a relationship built on what he had rather than who he was. He had watched enough in his industry to understand how loneliness looked on successful people who had chosen wrong, and he had decided he would rather wait. He waited until he was 29. Her name was Ifeoma Chukwu. She was a pediatrician, quiet, precise, funny in the particular way of people who are normally serious, with eyes that paid complete attention and a laugh that, when it arrived, was completely genuine and therefore completely disarming. They met at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend in Abuja, were seated next to each other by accident, and talked for 4 hours while the party moved around them. He called her 2 days later. She answered. They had a first date that lasted 6 hours and a second date that lasted 8, and by the third date they were not counting anymore. He brought her to Onitsha to meet his mother 6 months into the relationship. This was not a casual gesture. He had never brought a woman home. Ngozi received Ifeoma with the particular warm attention of a woman who has been waiting a long time and is now determining whether the wait has been worthwhile. The determination took approximately 35 minutes. After dinner, while Chitty was helping to clear the table, Ngozi took Ifeoma's hands across the kitchen table and looked at her carefully. "You are a doctor," she said. "Yes, ma," Ifeoma said. "You work with children." "Yes, ma, pediatrics." Ngozi nodded slowly. "Children know people," she said. "They know when someone is good. Do your patients like you?" Ifeoma smiled. "Some of them. The younger ones are sometimes scared of me because I give injections. But they come back. They usually come back." Ngozi squeezed her hands. "Then you are good," she said. "A child knows." She told Chitty later that night, in the sitting room when Ifoma had gone to bed. "This one is real." Chitty said, "I know." Ngozi said, "Don't be slow." He proposed 4 months later, in the living room of the house where he had grown up, with his mother present, which was where he had always imagined doing it. They were married in 2020, a smaller wedding than the times might have warranted for a man of his means. This was partly because of circumstances that year had imposed on everyone, and partly because neither he nor Ifoma had any interest in performance. Ngozi was in the front row, in gold-colored lace, with the expression of a woman for whom everything that was supposed to happen had happened. It was the last time, for a long time, that expression would be on her face. She had not always been this way. That is important to say, because the easiest stories are the ones where the villain has always been a villain, where there is no complication, no origin, no explanation that asks us to hold more than one thing at once. Chitty Bankole had not always been this woman. There had been a time, not long ago, not in a distant past, but genuinely recently, when she had been someone her own mother had been proud of without reservation. Titilola Bankole, she had kept her maiden name hyphenated, becoming Mrs. Chitty Bankole, though she rarely used the second part outside of official documents, was 31 years old when this story begins. She was from Ibadan, the second of 3 children of a retired civil servant father and a mother who ran a small provision store. She had grown up in a household that was not poor but was conscious of money in the way that households with careful parents are conscious of it. Always aware of what things cost, always making decisions that balanced immediate want against future security. She had been a bright student. She studied business administration at the University of Ibadan. She had been, during her university years, genuinely good company, sharp and funny and social, the kind of person who made a group more interesting by being in it. She had ambitions. She wanted to work in marketing. She wanted to build her own business eventually. She wanted the kind of Lagos professional life that looked good on Instagram and felt good in real life simultaneously. She met Emeka Ekin at a networking event in Lagos in 2016. Emeka was 34, running his building supplies business, solidly middle class in the particular Lagos definition of that term. A car that ran, a flat he was renting, a business that generated enough to live decently. He was not Chitty. He did not have Chitty's drive or Chitty's discipline or Chitty's analytical mind. But he was warm and social and good company, and he had a comfortable life that Chitty, who had been navigating Lagos on an entry-level marketing salary, found genuinely appealing. They dated for 2 years. The relationship was not a great love story. There was affection, there was compatibility, there was a shared sense that they were each at a stage of life where settling down made sense, but it was real enough. She met his family and found his mother lovely and his sister Adiz intimidating in a good way and his younger brother Chitty interesting in a way she couldn't quite articulate. They married in 2018. The early years of the marriage were fine. Not spectacular. There was no great romance, no defining moments of connection, but functional and generally pleasant. They lived in Onitsha, in a house that Emeka had bought with some savings and some family contribution, including a significant one from Chitty that had been framed as a wedding gift, but that Chitty had always been vaguely uncomfortable with, though she couldn't have explained why. Perhaps because gifts from people more successful than you created obligations, she wasn't sure she wanted. The trouble started, as it often does, not with one large event, but with an accumulation of small things. The small things were largely about Mama Ekin. Mama Ekin, Ngozi, had always been present in the marriage in the way that Nigerian mothers-in-law are present, significantly, warmly, with an expectation of being welcomed that was so natural and so certain that it required no negotiation. She visited regularly. She stayed for extended periods. She had opinions about how the house was run and how food was prepared and what choices were being made. And she expressed these opinions freely in the way that mothers who have raised good children express opinions. Not with cruelty, not with malice, but with a directness that assumed the listener would receive the information in the spirit it was given. Chitty did not receive it in the spirit it was given. She received it as criticism, as undermining, as the presence of a woman who had not relinquished her centrality in her son's life and who was, by the fact of her opinions and her visits and her warmth and her history with Emeka, making Chitty feel peripheral in her own home. This feeling, which had some legitimate basis, as Chitty's emotional experience was real even if her interpretation of its causes was sometimes uncharitable, grew. It grew slowly and quietly, as resentments do, finding fuel in small moments that were not necessarily significant on their own, but that, accumulated, created a story. The story Chitty was telling herself, by the second year of the marriage, was this: Mama Ekin does not respect me. Mama Ekin treats this house as if it is still her house. Mama Ekin makes my husband feel more loyalty to his mother than to his wife. Mama Ekin is the reason I am not fully in my own home. The story had enough truth in it to be persuasive and not enough truth in it to be accurate. But Chitty was not in a position to audit her own story, and so she believed it, and the belief shaped her behavior in ways that she justified to herself with the story. By the third year, she had begun managing Mama Ekin's visits. Shorter stays, less access to the kitchen. Chitty had opinions about the kitchen, which was her territory. Less involvement in household decisions. When Mama Ekin offered advice, Chitty smiled and thanked her, and did what she had been planning to do anyway, and then was slightly cold for several days afterward as punishment for the advice having been offered. Emeka saw some of this. He did not have Chitty's analytical mind or Chitty's directness, and so he handled it the way a man who prefers peace over clarity handles the things he sees but does not want to confront. He let it go. He told himself Chitty was sensitive. He told himself his mother was sometimes overbearing. He told himself it would smooth out. It did not smooth out. In 2021, Emeka's business hit a difficult period. A combination of supply chain disruption and a slow payment from a major client left the building supplies company seriously strained. Emeka was stressed and distracted and increasingly reliant on Chitty's steady income. She had moved from marketing into procurement and was earning well to maintain the household. This shift in financial dynamics changed something in the marriage. Chitty had always been the practical one. Now she was also the primary earner, and this changed how she saw the house, the decisions, the roles. What she had felt was her rightful authority as the wife became, in her internal story, financial authority. She was funding this household. This household was hers. Mama Ekin's position in the household was reframed accordingly. In Chitty's mind, from respected mother-in-law to dependent, from family matriarch to an elderly woman who needed to understand that circumstances had changed. In early 2022, Mama Ekin's own house in Onitsha, the house Leonard and Ngozi had built together, was damaged in a flood. A wall had collapsed. Part of the roof was compromised. The repairs would take months and were not insignificant in cost. It was agreed, Emeka proposed it. Chitty agreed with what seemed like warmth that Mama Ekin would come and stay with them while the repairs were completed. She arrived with 2 bags and her Bible and a cooking pot, and her good spirits intact. She stayed in the guest room, which was comfortable. She helped with the cooking when Chitty allowed it. She attended the local church. She chatted with the neighbors who quickly came to know and love her with the speed that communities always recognized people of her quality. The repairs, estimated at 3 months, stretched to 5, then 7, then 9 because the contractor was unreliable and the rains kept coming and the money was slow and Emeka kept saying it would be done soon. And during those 9 months, slowly, Mama Ekin's world in her son's house got smaller. The guest room was the first thing. It happened gradually, in the way that the removal of dignity from a person happens gradually, not all at once, because all at once would be visible, would require confrontation, would force the person doing it to see themselves doing it. Gradually is safer. Gradually can always be explained. The guest room became unavailable in the 5th month of Mama Ekin's stay because, Chitty explained, her mother was coming to visit. Mama Ngozi, Chitty's mother, arrived from Ibadan and occupied the guest room. Mama Ekin was moved to the study, which had a daybed in it that was reasonably comfortable. Chitty's mother stayed for 6 weeks. When she left, the guest room was not offered back to Mama Ekin. Instead, Chitty mentioned that she was thinking of converting the study into a proper room for her younger sister, Simi, who was going to be joining them for a while she looked for a job in the city. "Where will Mama stay?" Emeka asked. "The back room is fine," Chitty said. "It's actually bigger than the study." The back room had been used for storage. Emeka had cleared it out, painted it, put a fan on the wall. It was functional. Barely. It smelled of the paint and of the old newspapers and boxes that had been stored there for years. The window was small and set high in the wall. The light was inadequate. But Chitty had furnished it, and this was the detail that Chitty did not understand about herself, that she missed completely, with furniture from the storage room itself, which included an old sleeping mat that had been sitting folded in a corner for several years. A thin, woven mat with a tier running diagonally across the middle. There was a bed frame in the room. There was a mattress in the house, one of the guest room mattresses. But the guest room mattress was now under Simi, who had arrived and settled into the study-turned-bedroom with the cheerful indifference of a 23-year-old who has been given free accommodation in a city she wants to live in. Mama Ekin said nothing when she saw the mat. She sat on the edge of the bed frame, and she looked at the mat, and she thought about the mattress in the guest room, and she thought about the mattress in the main bedroom, and she thought about the fan in the study that Simi now used, and she looked at the wall fan in this room that had only one speed setting, off or loud, and she thought about the small window and the paint smell and the light. She picked up the mat and laid it on the bed frame and smoothed it with her hands. She said her evening prayers. She slept. She did not call Chitty that night. She was not going to call Chitty with this. Chitty was building something important in Abuja. Chitty had a new wife. Chitty called every Sunday and she told him she was fine and he believed her, and this was how it should be. But the mat was not the end. The mat was the beginning. Because Chitty Bankole, emboldened, as unkind people become emboldened when their unkindness meets no resistance, began to extend the territory of her authority. The kitchen was renegotiated. Mama Ekin had been cooking some of her own meals as she preferred. She had specific ways of preparing certain things that were different from Chitty's, and she found it easier to simply cook for herself. Chitty began finding reasons why this was inconvenient. The kitchen schedule was busy. The gas was to be conserved. Cooking smells from certain ingredients were too strong. Mama Ekin was welcome to eat with the family, which meant eating what Chitty decided and eating at Chitty's timing, after Chitty's mother and sister had been served. The social access was restricted next. Neighbors who visited were received by Chitty in the sitting room. Mama Ekin, who had become friendly with several of them, was not always called from her back room when they came. Sometimes she would emerge, not knowing they were there, and the visit would already be wrapping up. Sometimes she would hear voices through the wall and understand that people she knew were in the house and she had not been told. The money question arrived in month 7. Emeka had started sending his mother a small monthly allowance, not large, but consistent, enough for her personal needs and small expenses. Chitty did not know about this initially. When she discovered it, during a conversation about household expenses that became unexpectedly detailed, she expressed the view that the money being sent to Mama Ekin was money that could be used for household costs. This was presented not as an objection to his mother receiving money. Chitty was careful about how she framed things, but as a practical observation about budgetary efficiency, given the current difficulties with the business. Emeka, who hated conflict, who was stressed about the business, who had been managing his mother's situation partly through selective inattention, agreed to discuss it with his mother. The discussion was one of the most uncomfortable conversations of Emeka's life. He did not take away the allowance entirely. He could not bring himself to do that, but he reduced it. He gave his mother the reduced amount in an envelope handed to her on the first day of the month and did not meet her eyes while handing it over. Mama Ekin took the envelope. She put it in her wrapper. She did not say anything. She went back to her back room with the torn mat and the small high window and the one-speed fan, and she sat on the edge of the bed frame, and she held her Bible and she prayed for a long time. She prayed for her son, both sons. She prayed for Emeka's business. She prayed for Chitty, which required more effort than the other prayers. She prayed for Chitty and Ifoma. She prayed for Adiz and her children. She prayed in the honest, direct, almost conversational way she had always prayed, that God would see what was happening and that God would arrange what needed to be arranged in the way that God arranges things quietly, without drama, but completely. She did not know that God had, in a manner of speaking, already started arranging. Because Chitty had noticed. Chitty Ekin had a habit that served him well in business and served him even better in life. He paid attention to what was not said. In property negotiation, the things people did not say, the hesitations, the subjects changed, the questions not asked, were often more informative than what they said directly. He had developed this skill over years of sitting across tables from people who wanted to conceal things and had learned to read the negative space of a conversation. He applied this skill, unconsciously, to his Sunday calls with his mother. The calls followed a pattern. She would pick up on the first or second ring. She would say his name with warmth. She would ask about him, his health, his work, Ifoma, whether he was eating properly. He would answer and then ask about her. She would say she was fine. She would give him small news, the church, the neighborhood, what Emeka had said about the business, what she had read in a devotional. In month 6 of his mother's stay at Emeka's house, the pattern changed in ways that were invisible if you weren't paying Chitty's kind of attention. The first thing he noticed was the subject of the house, her own house. The repairs stopped being mentioned. She had been mentioning it regularly, asking about progress, making occasional dry observations about the unreliability of contractors. Then it stopped coming up. This could mean the repairs were done. This could mean she had stopped thinking about the repairs, or it could mean she had stopped thinking about going back. The second thing was smaller. She stopped mentioning cooking. She had always talked about what she was cooking. It was one of her pleasures and she shared it freely. A dish she had made, something she had experimented with, something Emeka had particularly enjoyed. In month 6, she stopped mentioning it. When he asked what she had eaten, she said simply that they had had a good dinner and moved on. The third thing was a word she used. On a Sunday in month 7, toward the end of the call, she said, "Don't worry about me, Chitty. I have everything I need. I have everything I need." Chitty sat with this for a moment after the call ended. He turned it over. His mother had never in his memory said anything like this. She was not a woman who felt the need to reassure. She was not a woman who voluntarily denied that she might want anything. "I have everything I need" was the sentence of a woman who was telling him not to ask. And a woman who was telling him not to ask was a woman who did not want him to know the answer if he did. He called Adiz that evening. Adiz was in Port Harcourt. She had visited their mother twice in the past 6 months, once in month 2, once in month 5. Chitty asked her directly what she had seen. Adiz was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to alarm you," she said. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She told him about the back room, about the mat, about the kitchen, about the allowance, about Chitty's mother and sister in the rooms while Mama Ekin was in the back. She told him about the subtle management of the space, how their mother moved through the house carefully, apologetically, as if she were a guest who was taking up more space than was welcome. "Why didn't you tell me?" Chitty said. His voice was level, very level. "Because she made me promise not to. She said you were building something important and she didn't want to distract you." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to sort this," he said. "Chitty." "Not in a way that creates a bigger problem, but I'm going to sort it." He hung up. He sat in his Maitama apartment in the particular stillness of a man who has just heard something that has rearranged his priorities. He thought about his father's voice in the hospital. "Your mother, don't let anyone." He thought about the promise he had made. He thought about a torn mat. He thought about his mother saying, "I have everything I need," with the voice of a woman who had decided to protect him from the truth. He was angry. He was very angry. But Chitty Ekin, the boy who had decided at 8 years old to build his life on the understanding that property was power and patience was essential, did not act from anger. He had learned, through years of negotiation and relationship management and the particular education of real estate, that the most effective action was almost never the most immediate one. He picked up his phone. Not to call Emeka, not to call Chitty, not yet. He called his lawyer. Mr. Edwale Oguniemi was 47 years old, a Lagos-trained barrister who had relocated to Abuja 15 years ago and who had been Chitty's legal advisor for the past 3 years. He was a careful, precise man who charged appropriately for his expertise and who had, over 3 years, handled a variety of property and business matters for Chitty with exactly the thoroughness Chitty required. "I need to talk to you about something," Chitty said. "Not business, family." "Of course," Mr. Oguniemi said. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." They met in Mr. Oguniemi's office on Maitama Drive at 9 the following morning. Chitty explained the situation clearly and without emotional excess. The facts, the conditions, the history, what he wanted to achieve. Mr. Oguniemi listened. He asked several precise questions. Then he was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What you're describing," he said, "is a situation where your mother has been displaced from an appropriate standard of living by people whose authority to make that displacement is, let's say, informal rather than legal." "Yes," Chitty said. "And you want to change that situation in a way that is permanent, documented, and cannot be undone by whatever happens in your brother's household." "Yes." "I have a few options for you," Mr. Oguniemi said. "Let me walk you through them." He walked through them. Chitty listened with the focused attention he brought to every significant decision. When Oguniemi had finished, Chitty sat for a moment. "The trust option," he said. "Explain it again." Oguniemi explained it again. Chitty nodded. "That one," he said. "Do that one, and I also want to look at property." "What kind of property?" "For my mother, something she owns in her name. Not in my name, not in Emeka's name, hers." Mr. Oguniemi looked at him with the expression of a lawyer who has seen a great many family situations and who recognizes a good one when he does. "I'll draw up the structures," he said. "Give me 2 weeks." Chitty stood. He straightened his jacket. "One more thing," he said. "I want to send someone to see my mother, not an official visit, someone she knows, someone who can see what things are actually like." "I understand," Mr. Oguniemi said. Chitty had 3 weeks of Abuja work ahead of him, dense and important. He could not leave immediately, but he made his arrangements, briefed the person he was sending, his personal assistant, a sharp woman from Enugu named Chiamaka who his mother had met and liked, and continued doing what he always did, which was work. And think. And wait. He was, after all, a man who had been practicing patience since he was 8 years old. Chiamaka arrived at Emeka's house on a Wednesday afternoon with a car full of provisions, food, household supplies, medications his mother took, A bag of things from Abuja markets that Mama Ekin sometimes mentioned. Chitty received her in the sitting room with the professionally warm hospitality she deployed for visitors. Tea offered, pleasantries exchanged, inquiries made about Chitty and Ifoma with what seemed like genuine interest. Chiamaka, who had been briefed on what to look for, played her role. Grateful, slightly scattered, here on behalf of Oga Chitty who sends his love, please could she just greet Mama before heading back. She was taken to the back room. She greeted Mama Ekin with warmth and sat with her for an hour, during which she observed everything without seeming to observe anything. She saw the mat. She saw the single window. She saw the small fan. She heard Mama Ekin's voice, warm, as always, full of gratitude for Chitty's thoughtfulness, talking about the church and the neighbors and how well the food provisions were, and she heard, underneath all of this, what Chitty had described. The performance of fine. She left with a hug and a list that Mama Ekin gave her of a few additional things she might need, written in the careful handwriting of a retired English teacher. Chiamaka called Chitty from the car before she had reached the end of the street. "It's exactly what Adi said," she said. "The room. Small, poor light, she's on a mat, sir. An old mat with a tear in it, on a bed frame but on a mat." Chitty was quiet. "She seems all right in herself," Chiamaka continued. "Her spirit is intact, but she's being squeezed. That's the only word I have for it, squeezed." "Thank you, Chiamaka." "Sir." "I have it," he said. "I'm handling it." He called Mr. Oganiemi that same evening. "How far?" he asked. "The trust document is ready for your review. The property search, I have two options I want to show you. One in Asaba, one in Awka, both in her name." "Send me the documents tonight," Chitty said. "I'll review them, then we can sign." He reviewed them that night, meticulously. He read every clause, tracked every provision, marked 2 points he wanted adjusted. He sent his comments to Oganiemi by midnight. Oganiemi had the revised documents back to him by noon the next day. They signed on a Thursday morning in Oganiemi's office, 2 solicitors as witnesses, a notary. The trust document established a formal spousal and parental legacy trust with Mama Ngozi Ekin, her full name, restored, formal as the primary beneficiary. The trust held a newly acquired property in Awka, a properly constructed 3-bedroom house in a quiet residential estate, purchased in her name outright. The trust also held a monthly allowance, indexed for inflation, that would be paid directly to Mama Ngozi Ekin's personal bank account, an account that Chitty opened for her in her name alone without telling anyone. Additionally, and this was the provision that Mr. Oganiemi had described as elegant, the trust contained a clause designating Chitty as his mother's legal next of kin for all property and financial decisions, with the formal right to act on her behalf in any matter involving her accommodation, her welfare, and her financial provision. This right superseded any informal arrangement made by any other family member. Chitty signed, the witnesses signed, the notary stamped. It was done. He drove home from Oganiemi's office in the Abuja morning traffic, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly. There was too much grief underneath it for satisfaction. Grief for his mother on the mat. Grief for his father's voice in the hospital. Grief for the years he had been too busy and too trusting. He called Ifoma. She was at the hospital. She stepped out. "It's done," he said. She understood immediately what he meant. She had known about the situation since the call to Adiz. She had been the one who had said, quietly and with absolute certainty, the night he told her, "Whatever you need to do, do it. Your mother is not going to suffer in that house." "Good," she said now. "When?" "I'm going to give it a few weeks. Let Oganiemi prepare the full presentation, and then I'm going to send the lawyer." "Do you want to go yourself?" He thought about it. "Not yet, the lawyer first, then me." She was quiet for a moment. "She's going to be all right, Chitty." "I know," he said. She's always been all right. She's been all right on a torn mat in a back room. She deserves to be all right in something better. She will be. He was quiet for a moment. She's so much like my father, he said. Never asking, never complaining, just absorbing. She raised you, Ifoma said. She raised someone who pays attention. That's not a small thing. He drove the rest of the way home with the windows down, and the Abuja morning air coming through, and the document signed, and in Oganiemi's file, and the next step already clear in his mind. 3 weeks from now, the lawyer would come. It was a Tuesday. Chitty Bankole had no reason to anticipate anything significant about this Tuesday. It was a regular work week. She was working from home in the morning before heading to her office in the afternoon. Her mother, Mama Ngozi, was in the kitchen. Her sister Simi was still in bed. Emeka had left for work at 7:30 after a breakfast Chitty had prepared quickly and without much conversation, both of them in their usual Tuesday morning mode. Mama Ekin was in her back room. She had been up since 5:30. She always rose early. She could not help it. Decades of early rising had made the habit permanent, and had done her prayers and her morning devotional, and had then sat quietly because the kitchen was not available to her until Chitty or Mama Ngozi had finished their morning activities. She was reading. She had a small stack of books beside her bed frame, devotionals, 2 novels that Adiz had brought on her last visit, a collection of Chinua Achebe essays that had belonged to Leonard and that she had kept since his death. She was reading the Achebe, which she returned to periodically because his voice always felt like conversation. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the gate. She heard it from her room, 3 knocks firm and unhurried. She did not get up. It was not her gate to open. In the sitting room, Chitty heard the knock too. She was on her laptop reviewing a procurement document. She called to Seun, the gate boy, to see who was there. Seun came back. "Ma," he said, "there is a man at the gate. He says he is a lawyer." Chitty looked up from her laptop. "A lawyer? What kind of lawyer?" "He said he is from a firm. He has a letter. He said it is regarding the property of Mama and Mrs. Ngozi Ekin." Chitty frowned. She saved her document. She stood. She smoothed her outfit. She was in a blouse and trousers, presentable enough, and she went to the gate. The man at the gate was 50-something, in a dark suit that fit well, carrying a leather briefcase. He was accompanied by a younger man who was his assistant. He was not aggressive, not loud. He was completely professional. "Good morning, Ma," he said. "My name is Mr. Adwale Oganiemi. I am a barrister and solicitor with Oganiemi and Associates in Abuja. Am I addressing Mrs. Chitty Bankole Ekin?" "Yes," Chitty said. "What is this about?" "I am here to speak with Mrs. Ngozi Chukwuma Ekin," he said, "in connection with a legal matter concerning her welfare and her property rights. I also have documents for you and your husband, Mrs. Bankole Ekin, in your capacity as co-occupants of this property." Chitty's face did something complicated. "My mother-in-law she's inside," she said. "I would appreciate being shown in," Mr. Oganiemi said pleasantly. "I will not take much of anyone's time." He was shown in. Mama Ekin heard footsteps coming down the corridor, more than one pair, and one of them measured and formal. She put down her ape. She sat straight. There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she said. The door opened. Chitty stood in the doorway with an expression that Mama Ekin had never seen on her face before, a controlled uncertainty, as if she were trying to appear confident about something she did not understand. Behind Chitty, a man in a suit with a briefcase. The man looked at Mama Ekin. His expression shifted from professional to warm. "Mrs. Ngozi Ekin," he said, "my name is Adwale Oganiemi. I am a lawyer. I have been sent by your son, Chijubum Ekin. He asked me to come to you first before anyone else." Mama Ekin looked at him. She looked at his face, which was kind and precise, and which had the expression of a man who has come to deliver something good and knows it. She looked at the briefcase. She looked at Chitty, who was still in the doorway. She said to the lawyer, "Please sit." Chitty did not sit. She stood in the doorway. Mr. Ogniemi sat in the plastic chair beside the bed frame, the only chair in the room. His assistant remained standing by the door. "Mrs. Ekin," he said, "your son has asked me to bring you several things. The first is this." He opened the briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. He handed it to her. "A letter from Chitty. He asked that you read it first privately before we discuss the legal documents." Mama Ekin took the envelope. She looked at the handwriting on the outside, Chitty's handwriting, the same handwriting she had watched form itself over decades from a child's uncertain letters to this. Neat, precise, slightly compressed, the handwriting of a man who thought carefully before he wrote. "Can I have a moment?" she said. "Of course," Mr. Ogniemi said. He stood. "We will wait in the sitting room. Take all the time you need." He shepherded Chitty out with the gentle authority of a man who has been in many rooms where different kinds of people have different kinds of power, and who knows how to manage the arrangement. Chitty went, for the first time in months in her own house, without deciding to. The door closed. Mama Ekin sat on the edge of the bed frame on the torn mat, and she opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten in Chitty's careful script. It began, "Mama, I am writing this because I know that if I called you and told you what I have done, you would say it was too much. You would say you were fine. You would say I should not have bothered. So I am writing it down where you cannot interrupt me, and you can read it at your own pace and feel all the things you are going to feel. And then when you have felt them, you can read the legal documents Mr. Ogniemi has brought. I want to start with something I have never properly said to you, which is this. I know what you did. I don't mean what has been happening in this house for the past several months, though I know about that too now and we will address it. I mean what you did for the whole of my life. I mean the years you taught school and came home and cooked and checked our homework, and attended everything we had and managed the house and loved Papa and made us feel, even in the years when money was careful, that we lived in abundance. I mean the years after Papa died when you held yourself together and didn't fall apart and made sure I could still go to school and do my exams and go to university. I mean every Sunday call. I mean every time you told me I would be big before I was anything at all. I know what you did, Mama, and I am sorry it took me this long to make sure it was properly answered. There are 3 things in the documents Mr. Ogniemi will show you. The first is a house. It is in Auca in a quiet estate. It has 3 bedrooms, a garden, a kitchen that is yours and nobody else's, a sitting room with good light, and a bedroom with a proper bed and a proper mattress. The house is in your name, not my name, yours. Nobody can take it from you. Nobody can tell you where to sleep in it or what to cook in it or when you can use the kitchen. It is your house. I have already arranged for it to be furnished. Adi's helped with the choices. She knows what you like. There is a woman named Mrs. Ihajirika who lives next door and who has already been informed that you are coming and who will be your neighbor. I hope you like her. Chiamaka tells me she reminds her of your mother. The second thing is money. There is a bank account in your name. There is money in it enough for 2 years of comfortable living without depending on anyone for anything. There will also be a monthly amount transferred to this account every month permanently from a trust I have established. This is not charity, Mama. This is mine to give you and I give it gladly. When Papa was sick, you sold your gold earrings, the ones his mother gave you when you married, to pay for his first surgery. You thought I didn't know. I knew. The earrings were the beginning of everything you gave that nobody saw. Consider this the interest on what was owed. The third thing is what Mr. Ogniemi will explain to Chitty and to Emeka when you have read this and when you are ready. He will explain it to them professionally and without drama. He will simply make clear what is now formally, legally the case, that you have rights, Mama. Legal, documented rights to your welfare and your property and your dignity that I have made sure cannot be overridden by anyone. You will say this was too much. It was not enough. I am coming to see you next week. I will bring Ifoma. We are going to take you to see the house in Auca, and you are going to tell me what you think of it and what you want changed, if anything. And then I am going to take you to dinner somewhere nice. Not this house, somewhere else, somewhere with a tablecloth and a menu. And we are going to sit across from each other, and I am going to tell you everything I have been doing in Abuja, and you are going to tell me what you have not been telling me for the past 8 months. You do not have to protect me from your life anymore, Mama. I am not 7 years old. I love you. Chitty. P.S. Ifoma says to tell you she is learning your egusi recipe. She is not getting it right yet, but she is determined. She will either master it or injure herself in the attempt. Mama Ekin sat on the torn mat for a long time after she finished reading. She read it twice. The second time, she reached the part about the gold earrings and she stopped, and she pressed both hands over her mouth, and she sat like that for a moment. She had sold them the morning after the doctor told them the surgery estimate. She had taken them off in the bedroom mirror and placed them in a small cloth bag and driven to the gold dealer in Onitsha Market and come back with an envelope of cash. She had never told anyone. Not Leonard. She had told him she had gotten the money from her savings, which was true enough to not feel like a lie. Not Adiz, not Emeka, not Chitty. Not Chitty, who had been 17 and focused on his upcoming exams, who had not needed to know. Who had known anyway. She put the letter down on the bed frame. She smoothed it with her hands. She looked up at the small, high window with its inadequate light. Then she did something she had not done in months, not since she arrived in this room. She laughed. Not a sad laugh. A real laugh, the deep, chest-level laugh of a woman who is surprised by goodness. The laugh of a woman who has been praying for a long time and has just been shown that the prayers were heard, and the answer came from a direction she was looking at all along without seeing. She laughed until her eyes watered. Then she wiped her eyes with the hem of her wrapper, and she stood up slowly, with her knees that were always stiff in the morning, and she straightened herself, and she went to open the door and tell Mr. Agoniemi that she was ready. What happened in the sitting room of Emeka and Chitty Bankolekin's house that Tuesday morning was not dramatic in the way that confrontations in stories are sometimes dramatic. There was no shouting. There were no tears, not in the sitting room at least. There were no accusations, no raised voices, no moment of theatrical confrontation where years of resentment erupted. What there was a lawyer, sitting in a chair with a briefcase, speaking in the measured, precise language of someone who has organized facts into an irresistible structure. Chitty had called Emeka. He had left work and come home, arriving 20 minutes after Mr. Agoniemi had begun his presentation, entering to find his wife and mother seated across from a lawyer in his own sitting room. Mama Ngozi, Chitty's mother, had retreated to the kitchen. Simi had apparently sensed the atmospheric pressure and had not come downstairs. Mama Ekin was seated on the sofa, the good sofa, the one in the sitting room, for the first time in months. She had sat down simply and without comment, and nobody had thought to say anything about it. Mr. Agoniemi explained the situation to Emeka and Chitty calmly and completely. He explained the trust. He explained the property. He explained the bank account. He explained the monthly allowance. He explained the legal designation of Chitty as welfare trustee for their mother. He also explained in the same measured tone that he had documented the current living conditions of Mrs. Ngozi Ekin during her stay in this property. The accommodation, the meal arrangements, the financial adjustments, and that this documentation formed part of the trust file. Chitty's face during this explanation was a study in the experience of consequence arriving. It did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, the way the tide arrives. You don't notice it until you realize the ground you were standing on is wet. Emeka's face was different. Emeka's face was the face of a man who has been partially asleep about something important and has just been woken up with more information than is comfortable. He looked at his mother. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at his wife. He looked back at his mother. When Mr. Ogoniemi had finished his explanation, there was a silence in the sitting room. Then Emeka said quietly, "Mama, how long?" Mama Ekin looked at her firstborn son. She had raised this man. She had watched him come into the world and grow and become who he was, imperfect, like all of them but hers. "Long enough," she said, "but it doesn't matter now." "It does matter," Emeka said. His voice had something in it that Chitty recognized and that she was already calculating the implications of. "It matters. I should have seen." Mama Ekin looked at him with the expression of a woman who has moved past the need for apology into something larger and more complete. "You are my son," she said. "I love you. That doesn't change." Chitty, who had been very still since Mr. Ogoniemi began speaking, said, "I didn't realize." Mama Ekin turned to look at her. The look was not cold. It was not triumphant. It was the look of a woman who has prayed for someone sincerely and who has not stopped. "Chitty," she said gently, "we don't need to talk about what you realized. What matters now is what we do next." It was, in its way, an act of extraordinary grace. Chitty felt it. Something in her face shifted, the calculation, the management, the careful narrative she had been maintaining. Something in it shifted, and underneath it, briefly, was something more human. Something that looked almost like relief at not being what she had been. Mr. Ogoniemi was professional and efficient. He outlined what happened next. The house in Awka was ready for Mama Ekin to visit and approve. The bank account was active. A car would be arranged to take her to Awka the following week, with Chitty and Ifoma joining from Abuja. As he was finishing, he said, and this was Chitty's specific instruction, the one Mr. Ogoniemi had memorized precisely. "Mr. Chitty Ekin also asked me to say that he holds no ill will toward anyone in this household. He has taken these steps for his mother's welfare and security. He hopes that the family can find its way to a better arrangement going forward." He closed his briefcase. He stood. "I think that covers everything," he said. "Mrs. Ngozi Ekin, it was an honor. Mr. and Mrs. Ekin, good day." He was shown out. The sitting room was quiet. After a moment, Mama Ekin stood. She moved toward the door. Then she paused and turned back. She looked at Emeka. She said, "Come and see me before I leave for Awka, just you and me. We will talk properly." Emeka nodded. His eyes were wet. She looked at Chitty. "There is food in my room that Chiamaka brought. I will leave it in the kitchen for you. A beat. No one should go hungry in a house." Then she walked back down the corridor to her back room. She sat on the mat one last time. She picked up her egg. She read. The house in Awka was on a street called Harbor View Estate. A quiet, residential street with compound walls painted white and bougainvillea growing over the gates, and the sound, in the evenings, of generators starting up across the neighborhood, with the comfortable predictability of a community that had made its peace with the power situation. It was a 3-bedroom house. The sitting room had large windows on 2 walls and received morning light from the east in a way that made everything inside it look warm and considered. The kitchen was fully equipped, proper gas cooker, a refrigerator that hummed steadily, counter space enough to lay out ingredients for a full Sunday afternoon of cooking. The garden in the back was rectangular and had a concrete path around its perimeter and soil that was red and rich and ready. The master bedroom had a proper bed, not a bed frame. A bed, solid, good quality, with a mattress that had been chosen by Adiz with the specific brief from Chitty that it should be the mattress their mother had never been able to afford for herself and had probably never asked for. There was no torn mat anywhere in the house. Chitty and Ifoma arrived from Abuja on a Saturday morning, driving the 4 hours down. They picked up Mama Ekin from Emeka's house, where Emeka himself came out to the car and stood by the door and said goodbye to his mother with his hands in his pockets and his eyes doing something complicated, and they drove to Oka. Ifoma sat in the back with Mama Ekin for the drive. They talked the whole way. Ifoma had brought food for the journey, small chops and biscuits and a flask of tea, and she laid them out on her lap and served them with the natural attentiveness of a doctor who has been caring for people her whole professional life, and for whom the impulse is as automatic as breathing. Mama Ekin told Ifoma about the church in Nnakwa, about Lolo Chidinma's laugh, about the time Leonard drove 240 kilometers to apologize. 240 kilometers, Ifoma said. On a bad road, Mama Ekin said. He arrived at 9 in the morning and I made him stand at the gate for 20 minutes before I opened it. Ifoma laughed. Mama Ekin laughed. Chitty, driving, glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them laughing and felt something in his chest loosen. Something that had been tight since Chiamaka's call, tight since Adi's account, tight since the letter he had spent 3 evenings writing and rewriting. They arrived at the house at midday. Chitty had a key. He unlocked the gate, then the front door, and he stood aside and let his mother go in first. She walked through the sitting room slowly. She touched the walls. She always touched the walls of a new space, as if reading it. She looked at the windows and the light. She looked at the kitchen and went inside and opened a cabinet and closed it. She went through the bedrooms one by one, her hands trailing along the door frames. She came to the master bedroom last. She stood in the doorway for a moment. The room had curtains Adiz had chosen, a warm orange-yellow, the color of Harmattan light, the color of Igbo country at 3 in the afternoon. The bed was solid and large and made up with good linen. The window looked out onto the back garden. She walked to the window. She looked at the garden. She stood there for a while. Behind her, Chitty and Ifoma stood in the doorway. Then she turned around. She looked at her youngest son, this man she had watched decide, at 8 years old, to build something. This man who had told her, in a letter, about the gold earrings. This man who had signed documents in a lawyer's office to make sure she would never sleep on a torn mat again. She crossed the room and she held him. Both hands on his face first, the way she had held him since he was a small child, both hands cupped around his face, looking at him, and then she pulled him into a proper embrace. She said into his shoulder, "You are exactly like your father." Chitty held his mother. He did not speak. He did not need to. Ifoma, from the doorway, looked at the garden through the window and pretended to find something very interesting about the bougainvillea growing along the back wall. They stayed in Oka for the weekend. They ate the food Mama Ekin cooked in her own kitchen, the first real cooking she had done in months, full access to a full kitchen with good ingredients, cooking with the authority and the pleasure of a woman in her own space. She made ofe akwu and oha soup, and a pot of jollof rice for Sunday that Ifoma said was the best she had ever tasted in her life. Mama Ekin said, "I will teach you." Ifoma said, "Please, Chitty says I'm getting the egusi wrong." Mama Ekin said, "You are probably adding the crayfish before the uziza." Ifoma said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." Mama Ekin said, "Stop doing that." They laughed. On Sunday evening, before driving back, Chitty sat with his mother in the sitting room while Ifoma was on a call in the garden. The light was going, the orange-yellow of the Harmattan, exactly as the curtains had promised, and the generator of the house next door had just started up. "Are you happy?" Chitty asked. Mama Ekin considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I am at peace," she said. "Happy is something that moves, peace is something that stays." She paused. "I have peace, Chitty." He nodded. "And Emeka," she said. "He called me," Chitty said, 2 days ago." "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't seen. He said he should have." "He should have," Mama Ekin said, not harshly, simply. He knows that now. She was quiet for a moment, and Chitty. Chitty was quiet for a longer moment. This was the harder answer. Chitty is what she is, he said finally. I can't change that. I can only change the situation my mother is in, which I have done. Mama Ekin nodded slowly. Do not be bitter about her, she said. I'm not bitter, Chitty said. And it was true, largely, he had been angry, but anger and bitterness were different things, and he had enough discipline to keep the distance between them. I understand how people become the thing they are. It doesn't excuse it, but I understand it. Good, his mother said. Bitterness is expensive. You have built too much to pay for it. He smiled. You sound like Papa. Your father was a very wise man. He knew you'd say that. She looked at her youngest son across the sitting room of her own house in Auca with the orange curtains, and the cooking smells still in the air, and the sound of the neighborhood settling into evening. Thank you, she said, not for the house, not for the money, for all of it, for paying attention, for the letter, for the gold earrings, for the promise kept in a hospital room 17 years ago. Thank you for raising me, he said. They sat together in the gathering dusk until Ifoma came back in from the garden and put on the light and asked if anyone wanted tea, and Mama Ekin said yes, and Ifoma went to make it in the kitchen, and the house hummed with the ordinary, extraordinary music of three people who belonged to each other, at home. 3 months after the lawyer's visit, Chitty Bankolekin stood in what used to be the back room of her house. The room was empty now. Mama Ekin had taken her few things to Auca. The bed frame was against one wall. The thin woven mat with the tier running diagonally across its middle was folded in the corner where it had always been. Chitty stood in the doorway looking at it. She had been standing there for several minutes. She was not entirely sure why she had come to this room. She had been passing in the corridor and the door had been open and she had stopped and then she had gone in and now she was standing there. The room was quiet. The light from the small high window was inadequate. The paint smell was less than it had been. 9 months of habitation had reduced it to something barely perceptible. The fan was on its bracket on the wall, motionless. She thought about the mat. She thought about the choice she had made when she put it there. She had told herself at the time that it was temporary, that it was practical, that the old woman was resilient, had lived through harder things, would not mind. She had told herself a story, and the story had been sufficient at the time to permit the thing she was doing. The story was not sufficient anymore. The lawyer had come. The documents had been explained. The house in Auca had been purchased. The bank account had been opened. And Emeka, her husband, who had been largely passive through all of it, had come to her the evening after the lawyer's visit and had sat across from her in the bedroom and had said, quietly and without particular drama, that he needed to tell her some things. He had told her. He had told her that he knew he had been absent, that he had let things happen by not seeing them, and that not seeing them had been, in some ways, a choice. He had told her that his mother was the person who had raised him, and that whatever his failures had been in seeing the situation clearly, he did not want them to define what happened next. He had told her that he loved her and that he was not going to walk away from the marriage, but that he needed to know that she understood what had happened. Chitty had listened. She had listened in the way that people listen when they are trying to manage the information coming in rather than really receive it. She had said yes, and I understand, and I didn't mean for it to go as far as it did. But standing in the back room, looking at the mat, she understood something that the listening had not quite reached. She had diminished someone, not abstractly, not theoretically. Specifically, deliberately, one small step at a time, she had taken a woman who had lived with dignity for 68 years and had tried to reduce her to the size of that room and that mat and those small portions and that restricted kitchen. She had done it with full knowledge and had built a story around it that made it feel justified, and the story had been wrong. She was not a bad person. She was a person who had done a bad thing. There was a difference, and the difference mattered because it meant the thing could stop. Bad things done by people who are not fundamentally bad can be stopped when the person chooses to stop them. The choice was available. She picked up the mat. She folded it more neatly than it had been folded before. She carried it to the storage area and placed it there and came back and left the room. She called Mama Ekin that evening. Mama Ekin answered on the second ring. "Mama," Chitty said. "Chitty," Mama Ekin said. Her voice was warm. It was always warm. This was something Chitty had spent months interpreting as passive, as accepting, as the warmth of a woman who didn't know what else to be. She understood now it was actually more than that. It was the warmth of a woman who had decided, a long time ago, who she was going to be, and who maintained that decision across all circumstances, including the difficult ones. "I wanted to call," Chitty said. "I wanted to say," she stopped. She tried again. "I wanted to say that I know what I did wasn't right, and I am sorry." There was a pause. "Thank you," Mama Ekin said, simply. No elaboration, no performance of forgiveness, no dramatic release. Just thank you. "How is the new house?" Chitty asked. "The kitchen is perfect," Mama Ekin said, and Chitty could hear the smile in it, the specific pleasure of a woman in a kitchen that is entirely her own. "I made egusi yesterday, and I am going to teach my daughter-in-law. She is putting the crayfish in at the wrong time." Chitty laughed, a surprised, genuine laugh. "I'm sure she is." "I will fix it," Mama Ekin said. "I will fix her." They talked for 20 minutes. About the garden, about the neighbors, about Emeka and his business, about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. When they ended the call, Chitty sat for a while in the sitting room. She was thinking about what it would take to be more like the woman she had just spoken to. She was thinking that it would take a great deal, more than she currently had, but that it was not impossible. She thought about the mat, and she thought about the room, and she thought about what she was capable of when she chose to be something other than what fear made her. She was capable of more than the mat. She had not known that fully, until the mat showed her what she had become. The mat was gone now, the room was empty. What happened in it next was something she had the power to decide. There is a garden in Oka. It is not large, a rectangle of red anambra soil, bordered by a concrete path and a compound wall, with bougainvillea growing along the back. On one side, there is a row of tomato plants in various stages of enthusiastic production. On the other, herbs, scent leaf and yuzuza, and the particular small-leafed variety of bitter leaf that Mama Ekin's mother had always used, and that she has spent some effort tracking down in the Oka market. In the garden, on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, you will find a woman. She is 68 years old. She has silver in her hair and arthritis in her left knee that she manages without complaint, and reading glasses she is always misplacing. She wakes at 5:30. She says her prayers. She reads her devotional. She makes tea in her kitchen, the one with the good cooker and enough counter space and nobody else's schedule to defer to, and she drinks it at the kitchen table looking at the garden. Then she goes into the garden. She kneels on a foam pad her son brought from Abuja, because the arthritis makes kneeling on concrete uncomfortable, and she puts her hands in the red earth and she tends what is growing there. She thinks sometimes about a mat with a tear in it. She thinks about it not with bitterness. Bitterness is expensive, and she has spent her whole life economically, with resources, but with the particular complex feeling of someone who has been through something and has emerged on the other side of it with both their dignity and their understanding intact. She understands what the mat was. The mat was not really about sleeping accommodation, though it was that too. The mat was about what a person decides someone else deserves. It was about the particular kind of cruelty that does not announce itself but arranges things slowly, quietly, by degrees, so that a person ends up smaller than they should be, in a room smaller than they should have, with less than they have earned. And she understands what the lawyer was. The lawyer was not really about legal documents. though those matter and she values them. The lawyer was about what a son carries from a hospital room at 17. It was about a promise made by a boy to a father who was leaving, and the full, specific, painstaking keeping of that promise over the years that followed. It was about love that pays attention, the kind of love that notices what is not said on a Sunday phone call, that hears the thing under "I have everything I need," that acts not from drama, but from the deep, quiet certainty that the person being diminished is worth more than they are being given. She did not ask for the lawyer. She did not need to. She had prayed, she had waited, she had trusted. And the son she had raised, the son who had decided, at 8 years old, to understand the world well enough to shape it, who had studied and worked and been patient and built something real from nothing, from the lessons of a red earth road in Onitsha, and a father who listened, and a mother who endured, that son had paid attention. He is coming next weekend, he and Ifoma. She is going to teach Ifoma the egusi properly this time. No more crayfish at the wrong moment. They will eat together in her kitchen at her table, with food she made. And after dinner, when the evening has settled and the generator next door is running and the bougainvillea is catching the last light, they will sit in the sitting room with the orange-yellow curtains, and she will tell him what she has been thinking about. Not protecting him from it, she is done protecting him from her life. He is not 7 years old. She will tell him what she has been thinking. He will listen. He always listens. He learned it from his father. He learned everything that mattered from his parents. And from a mat with a tear in it, he learned that love, when it is paying attention, is the most powerful legal document in the world. If you are watching this right now and there is someone in your life who is sleeping on the equivalent of a torn mat, not necessarily literally, but in every sense that matters, go and do something about it. Don't wait for them to ask. Don't wait until it becomes a crisis. They are telling you they are fine, and they mean that they have decided to protect you. Don't let them protect you from their life. Pay attention. Go. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story moved you, if you felt something in your chest when the lawyer knocked on that gate like this video right now, one click, that's all it costs you. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub and turn on the notification bell. We tell stories that matter, stories about love and patience, and the particular power of people who were raised right and who remember it. Drop a comment, tell us, who is the Mama Ekin in your life? Who is the person who prays for you quietly and never asks for anything? Name them, honor them right here. Share this video with your siblings. Share it with anyone who has a mother. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that patience is not passivity, it is strategy. And that love, when it is paying attention, always finds its way home. This is Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.